This video, which is part 3 of a series of 3, is going to show you the steps that were used to create the final top coat and the final accents on this 1836 dresser. The way in which you apply top coats is especially important with mahogany, which has what is called chatoyancy or chatoyance. It is the way that mahogany, when it is properly stained and top coated, reflects and refracts light to create an almost holographic image in the grain and to make the images very much 3D when you're looking at it. These steps also apply to other woods like burled woods to bring out the same effect within them. But it's important the layering, it's important the choice of top coats, and that's going to be explained and demonstrated to you along with proper sanding with the correct grits between the layers of the top coat on this, so that you come out with a final finish that is just glass smooth to the touch, but is not shiny like glass, and is a very durable, hard finish while still amplifying all the traits of this old grain of this mahogany, which is especially rich in mahogany from 200 years ago. In addition, it's going to demonstrate to you how to put on the antiquing gels as highlights in steps rather than just deciding to put it all on at once, putting it on in stages to see the effects, to see the balance, and create a final balance with it. Also, how to correctly clean the poles so that they are brought back to their original brass look, but you have not destroyed any of the polishing that's been done for years over these pieces. All of those steps are here in this to help you see how to create the final images that we come up with so that this dresser is ready for another 200 years of use. One of the things that I get comments on is you should never, ever, ever wipe down raw wood or stained wood or finished wood after you're sanding with damp paper towels. And what I have found over time is it is the fastest way to get everything off. If I use a tack cloth across it, I can go back with a damp paper towel and I'm going to find more residue that comes off. If I just start with a damp paper towel, it's all done and I don't have to worry about it. This has been sitting out here in the shop, but there is always dust in the air. So before I put the next layer of finish on here, I need to wipe these down. And when I'm talking about a damp paper towel, I am not talking wet. What I do is I literally hold it out, do the other side, and you can see how far away I am from that spray. It's not wet. I couldn't clean my hands with it. But what it will do is it will take all the dust off of here without leaving any residue. And I'm going to do the same thing to the top back here. The rest of this will be done off camera, but I'm not leaving any wet marks, but I am getting dust off of it that has settled. And I can actually see it on my cloth, but it would be really hard for you to pick it up. What I'm putting on here next, I thought long and hard about how I wanted to finish this, because I want to bring her back as much as possible to where she would have been in 1836 when she first went into a home. That means I should be doing everything in shellac. The problem with shellac, well, there's positives to shellac. It's very easy to lightly sand it, put another layer of shellac on, and you're back to the original finish if there's damage. But very few people now are aware of shellac. And so if this piece passes to someone else who doesn't understand that coatings like polyurethane cannot be put over regular shellac because regular shellac has wax in it. And it will cause the polyurethane to peel off. It'll also cause it to fog, and it makes it look really bad. But if you use dewaxed shellac to start with, which is what this is. The SealCoat by Zinsser is shellac that has had the wax removed out of it. Shellac is a natural product that is created by insects. And so dewaxing it allows it to seal this. It will also add that extra layer of color that shellac does without leaving wax behind. So when I seal this with the SealCoat, it's going to give it, it's going to go in, it's actually going to do a little bit of fill in the open grain in this areas, and it's going to add more vibrance to the grain and the coloration. After it dries, I will be able to layer polyurethane over it, which is safer at this time period. If you're selling it to someone, if you are even passing it down in your family, people are more likely to go grab polyurethane to put another coat on, not realizing the difference in the products and what has to happen. I will leave a card in this that is attached to this piece that tells exactly how the finish was done, that it'll be easier to upkeep, and the polyurethane is much sturdier against water, against dings and bumping, so it's a harder finish. So that's what I've decided to do with this, to give her a more long-lasting finish, because she's not going to handle a lot of deep sanding multiple times without losing this beautiful veneer. The way that I have done this too is when I use top coats of any kind, I pour some out. You run the risk when you're putting it on and you're dipping back in the can that some of the stain can activate and can go back into your can of clear coat, and you don't want that to happen. And the way I'm going to be putting this on is a traditional method for shellac, whether it's dewaxed or regular. Shellac cannot handle, a lot of times you would put polyurethane here and start brushing both ways. Shellac cannot handle that. It gets a roughness because it dries so fast because of the alcohol base within it, that it will leave streaks and it will leave brush marks. So the traditional way to do it is to take cotton balls, a piece of old t-shirt or cloth, twist it up, and I will dip into, I'm going to tip this so that I can get a smaller amount of the shellac on here. And then you want to make single swipes. You don't want to come back and forth. So I'm going to start at one end. I have to do the marks, I will. And I have this aimed toward myself so that I can see where it's going, and I love seeing how the grain just starts glowing under the finish. Once you've got a little bit of the shellac absorbed into, and you can see I'm getting some stain on this, which is exactly why I did not want to put that into my can. And I have more control over what I'm getting here. And my last strokes will be getting these edges. This will dry for an hour, and then it will come back and start working on sanding it to get it ready for the polyurethane. But I love how the grain now is really starting to pop out of this. And we'll move the cameras so that you can see me do the top of the dresser to see how I handle a top area. It's the same process with this top. I want to go in straight lines. I don't want to try to do circles and all. You're going to get bubbles in the finish. The shellac was the SealCoat shellac was very gently stirred off camera. Close to this. Not doing swing arm motions. Go ahead and get this front edge. Oops, I missed my hold on there. So go underneath. As quick as this is taking this in, I may do 2 coats of this. And I can press down on this now because of the cotton balls inside it. To get more of the shellac to come out. And this is not a finish coat. This is just a SealCoat. And none of the streaking will show once this is dried and lightly sanded. Edges. And you need good light to make sure that you can see that you have actually coated all of what you're trying to coat. It's easy to get skip spots. So I will do the sides. I will do all the front pieces here. and then we'll come back and look at this. But with this, it's much easier than with a brush. A brush just doesn't want to deposit it as fast. So we've got 3 more door fronts here. The SealCoat of the Dewaxed Shellac has dried for 2 hours, which is plenty of time for it now to be ready to sand. I'm not going to use regular sandpaper. I could use a green Scotch-Brite scrubby. I would use a new one or one that I only used for sanding. Don't use one that you've used for cleaning deglossing. This is a similar material, but it's an even finer grit. This is 800 grit. So it will do even a softer sanding on this and a smoother finish. But you can definitely use the green for this particular step. I happen to have these in the shop of all different grits. So when you're sanding it, just like when you're sanding with anything, follow the grain. Don't go all around like you're scrubbing. Follow the grain, or you're going to make marks that you don't want, even with this fine grit. It's a little scary when you start to do this, because it looks like you're fogging it all up, but you're really not. Preparing it for the next level of finish. There's not a lot of residue coming off, but it's definitely on here, and I can see it on the pad. It does not take a lot of sanding, but you do need it to be down smooth. And like I did before, I'm just lightly misting this paper towel and off any of the sanding residue, because that sanding residue, and you can see it here, that will leave texture in your finish. It's one of the reasons people get a bumpy finish when they're putting top coats on. That will be done to all of the drawers, and I'm going to show you the process for the top of the table, of the dresser rather, because it is so easy to create windshield wiper marks thinking you're not doing any damage because you're not feeling a lot of difference with the sanding. But this is, at this point, is super smooth to the touch. and it will just get more and more smooth the more times I put a coat of finish and I sand, and I put a coat of finish and I sand. It will just get that much smoother and that much richer of a finish. It's worth the time input. Even though you're going to be able to see there are waves of grain going through the top of this, that doesn't mean that you can do all different directions on this. You have to keep going straight up and down it. This grain would have formed upright in the tree trunk, going completely up and down vertical. You want to follow that same thing, or you're going to get marks across this grain that are going to show up differently underneath the finish. And the clear finish of the polyurethane over this is going to amplify any of those marks and scratches. So for me, I want to do like half of it standing by the side. When I get closer here to the middle, I can easily move back and forth and keep moving with it. I'm not trying to go the whole length, because I'll guarantee you your arm is going to form an arc without you even thinking about it. There is a slight sheen left from the shellac that I can see, and that is what I'm sanding down. And in the areas that that are shiny, I make sure I hit those down. This spot right here, want that down a little bit more. There it goes. Now it's gone. If you pay attention to how this feels on the surface, you can feel when you lose any drag to it. And that tells you you have sanded enough on it. And just like before, wipe it down. You can see I am not making the surface wet. And this is super smooth to the touch right now. It'll get even smoother as coats of finish go on. I need to sand all of the rest of this. The detailing on the front is where the green scrubby and like this is really, a piece like this is really your friend, because, excuse me, it's really hard, it's really easy to cut down that design sanding if you're not careful. But this is a high enough grit that it's not going to break through that and break the finish off of it. So off camera, I'm going to sand the remainder of this case and wipe it all down, and it'll be ready to put our first coat of polyurethane on. I'm about to put the first coat of polyurethane on this, and a foam brush that's disposable is a really good item to use with it. It's going to go smooth, and polyurethane doesn't clean out of these. And a brush, unless you're really skilled with it, you're going to leave some brush marks with it. I could brush this, but I would rather show you a way that will make you, for certain, successful putting a clear coat on. I'm choosing oil-based polyurethane. It's going to soak into, even with the SealCoat on here, it's going to penetrate some into the wood. It's going to give it more moisture, more protection, and polyacrylic will look slightly cloudy over this. You'll have people argue that of, oh no, mine's never cloudy, it's never cloudy. Where you need to figure out whether it is or isn't is when you see two pieces side by side, and you can totally see the difference in the finish. So this piece is getting polyurethane to cover it. And you want good light so that you can see what you're doing. If this is more friendly for being able to stroke back and forth through it, you want to watch for bubbles. That's why I'm not going fast. I don't want to create any. This was thoroughly stirred off camera. And it takes a while to stir it because you have to go slow, because if you create bubbles in the polyurethane, you're going to have bubbles in your top coat that you cannot get rid of. It means you're going to go slower creating your finish, but that is okay. And well, since I've got this first row done here, I'm going to come around to the front and get this front edge, because there's bound to be some overlap on it. And I don't want any of that to dry as I'm doing the top. There are no fans on. I don't want any dust thrown up while this is wet. And this is definitely bringing the grain back to life. Your last swipe with the polyurethane is a very light touch. For some reason, that doesn't want to fill right there. So turning my brush sideways, let me get into that divot. There's a spot there too. And one long run, both directions, will get rid of any stop and starts points you have. And don't wait until you're done with the whole top to go back and do your long strokes. Slightly overlap where you applied right before, and come back with a full stroke. Here the grain is really lighting up for me. It's one of the magical things about polyurethane and how it just makes grain pop. The more saturated your foam brush gets, easier it is to apply, but you don't want to start by soaking your brush or you'll have too much and you'll start creating a lot of bubbles. And that's why I can move a little faster at this point too. It's because my brush is holding more finish and it's allowing it to move easier. It's allowing it to glide. Back to where I was. Final long strokes on this. And I need to get the sides. I don't know, Jim, if that's coming through on the screen, but if there's any way you can adjust so that you can see the difference in this, because I have to keep going. You can't just let it sit or you will have lap marks. Wow, that's just glowing here in person. It's doing exactly what mahogany is known for. This way. This way. This way. Just These come in cheap multi-packs. You can buy them individually too, but for every coat of finish that you intend to put on with a foam brush, buy a separate brush for it and just toss these. They're not cleanable, and if you try to use it the next day, you're going to have edges here and along here that are dry and brittle and will make scratch marks in the finish. Not actually scratching it, but it'll leave lines like it was scratched in the finish. It's just not worth it. They're too cheap. Throw it away and get a new one. It just doesn't hold wrapped in a Ziploc bag. It doesn't hold wrapped up in cellophane. It just gases too fast. This first coat of polyurethane has had to dry for 3 days. That's really unusual, but it also has to do with how incredibly humid it is here right now in North Florida. So I had to wait longer. I was able to sand some of the parts of this at 48 hours, but it's needed the 3rd day for some of the places to be dry enough to sand. If you start to sand and you're feeling a pull and a drag, the finish is not dry enough to sand, so stop, let it dry completely, and then come back to it. When I started sanding the polyurethane, I started with the 800 grit, which you saw me using over the shellac. The 800 grit was perfect for the shellac, but for the polyurethane, to sand down what are called nibs, it's a little bit of roughness that you feel in finish. It can be from a bubble in the finish, it can be from dust that's caught in the finish as it dries, which is pretty much impossible to avoid unless you have a commercial clean room to do your finishes in. But going back to it, 1 coat of polyurethane is not your finish coat. This is got an unevenness to it, even though it was put on smooth, it's got an uneven sheen. It's not finished. You need 2, but preferably 3 and sometimes 5 coats of polyurethane to get the smooth, beautiful finish that you want on a piece of furniture. It's just taking the time to let it sit and dry. I mean, literally, this is probably going to take me maybe 45 minutes max to put another coat of polyurethane on this whole thing, and then I'm walking away from it. I'm just waiting for it to dry. So it's not like I'm spending all day, every day, babysitting it. I'm not. I'm just going through steps. But I wanted you to see what you should see when you're sanding with the different grits. And coming down to 400 got me where I needed to be to get this finish the way it needs to be. And again, stay straight with the grain. You're going to see that it slightly dulls the surface. If it doesn't, it's not a rough enough grit. If it makes scratch marks, it's way too rough a grit. But in finishing, when you're putting on these finish coats, it's usually 400 grit and up. And just like I did before, I'm going to take a damp paper towel to wipe any of the dust residue off. I don't want to knock it off into the air so that it's going to settle into my finish. And here I can see a slight coloration on this, you probably can't. And each coat of the finish will come off with less residue on your towels. I'm not going to put you through watching me put the polyurethane on again. I'm just going to tell you that I'm going to put this coat of polyurethane on. I'm going to sand again like I just did, and then I'm going to put the final coat on, because I can feel the buildup on here of the finish, and I will be shocked if it needs more than a third coat. If it does, I'll add it, but I think the third coat's going to be plenty. When things don't go quite like you expected, you pivot. And that's what I did with the finish on this. The first coat of polyurethane was looking like the finish I wanted. But when I put the second coat on, even after I did the sanding with the green Scotch-Brite pad, which is equivalent to 400 grit paper, it was too shiny. It was not the look I wanted. The shellac, when it's been layered and sanded, applied and sanded, has a very soft glow to it that has a slight sheen, but it's not shiny. And for some reason, the satin polyurethane, which should have turned out like that, was coming out like it was semi-gloss, and I really did not want that on this piece. So I went and got matte polyurethane, which is a newer product in the polyurethane line. It is not the water-based polyacrylic version of it. It is the oil-based. And I had to apply 2 coats of that because the first coat, there was still some shine. It was after it dried that was coming through from the 2 coats of poly that were the satin. So after the second coat, every one of them sanded in between, I have a beautiful, soft, glowing finish, which is what I wanted, and is what shellac would have looked like, the tone of sheen that shellac would produce. What many people don't realize is after your final coat of top coat, you still need to sand one more time. And this time I'm sanding with the gray pad, which is 800 grit. And you're going to feel just like you did between every other layer, you're going to find places where you can feel like there's just a little bit of like a tiny grit on there, which is dust particles that were adhered while this is drying. So to knock those down and to get this into like it's been waxed and dusted and rubbed for many, many years, your final thing is to do a final sanding. It sounds like it's something you wouldn't want to do, but isn't that going to ruin the finish? Not when you use this higher grit of sanding pads. So I'm going to show you what has to happen. And as you're sanding, you're going to keep going back and feeling with your fingers. Am I feeling places? You're going to look across the surface to see, do I see any places that I can see one of those teeny tiny bumps? I want rid of it. And you're using significant pressure sanding. What you don't want to do is find a spot, and then use your finger and gouge in that area. That's going to change the sheen of the top in that area. Don't do that. Keep it as a flat sanding. Use pressure like you're trying to sand down to moving through the finish, even though you're not going to be. You're going to look for shiny spots. Anything that's a higher sheen, you're going to give that a little more sanding. Every piece of this will be done this way. Every part of the case, all the drawers. And there's no scratch marks showing up doing this. Sometimes you see a spot where it turns a little bit whiter as it's pulling off one of those little nibs. Just keep working. And in that case, I rubbed my finger across it and that took the piece that was hanging off of it. Always stay with the grain. You can see the little bit of residue on this, and the bits where there are little bitty tiny specks of white on this is where there are little tiny divots in the top of this from earlier damage that was not completely sanded off when we redid the top of this. Now the next step right here with this is you have two choices. You can just dampen the paper towel by holding it about this far, or actually, because I'm going to get it right back off and I want to get everything out of the sanding dust, out of all these little divots, you can actually spray water directly on this because you're not leaving it to sit. This is dry enough, it's not going to let the water go through, you're going to see it bead up. I'm going to do it with a spray because it's going to go faster. And this has a beautiful, soft glow to it now. And the whole thing is going to need to be finished sanded like this. And then it's going to be ready to move into the house. I'm ready to do some final accent work on this piece so that the detailing on these columns and the feet pop out of this, and that the columns themselves here don't get lost in the darker finish of this. The Empire movement started in France, and it was very, very high-end pieces that they actually, on all of the decorative pieces at the top and bottom of the columns and the feet, were actually gilded with gold and then sealed. But when this came over to the United States, the style was loved, the style was wanted, but they wanted to find a more economical way to get more of the pieces into American homes. This piece was probably done in a Philadelphia workshop from the designs on it and the research that I have done. And the Philadelphia shop, they did a combination of things. They would do the solid gold look, They would do the black of these columns if it wasn't an ornate burled wood that the column was made out of, and the feet could be solid, or they did portions of that. They would highlight parts of it, but not all of it, and they rarely did the black of this portion of the piece, which makes it easier at times to see, was this a French piece or was this an American piece from the 1820s and 1830s. So that's what I'm going to be doing with this. I'm choosing to highlight rather than do heavy gold. And in order to do some of this solid gold look, I am going to be taping it off and doing the solid areas first, and then coming back after that's dry and doing the highlighted parts, because it may take 2 coats of the antiquing gel in order to get solid coverage on this. I won't know until I start working on it. The tape I'm going to use, because this finish is not cured. Oil finishes, just like water-based finishes, need a full 30 days to fully finish drying, and in the case of oil-based, they're constantly gassing off. This has dried enough now that I can go ahead and put the gold on here, but if I were going to do this all solid on these pieces, I would wait at least 2 to 3 weeks, and preferably 4 weeks before I did that, so that none of that would bubble. And the yellow frog tape is specifically made for more fragile finishes, wallpaper, newly painted surfaces, so that you get the seal, but you don't get enough stick to pull off and damage or leave sticky behind. So I'm going to be taping so that I can do this band in solid gold, and down here, the center band that's here will be solid gold. The bottom will not be. It will just be accented a little bit, and the feet will be accented. So that's the next step that I'm working on with this to get this to its final completion. You want to keep some pressure on the tape because the yellow really wants to fold into itself. And if you come up before you press it down and you just feel it touch the bottom of that edge, you can get the tape to go where you need it to go. And it's more important for it to be at the underneath edge of this than for it to be perfectly smooth down here. And the yellow has some give to it, which makes it easy for it to do that. And so now that is, you can see, you can kind of see through that tape because it's so thin. So that has the bottom of it done. This edge crimped up, so I'm not going to use that edge to come around this, and I may wind up having to cut another piece here. And it's the same thing. Come down to that edge. And I have one tiny spot back here that I can see that I will use this piece to get in there. I'll do that on both sides, and I'm going to have to get down in the floor, and my head will definitely be in the way of the camera, but I will tape this off, and then I will add gold onto this. The tape looks really wonky on here, and especially down here. Tearing small pieces to go along these edges and slightly overlapping them works better when you're going around a circumference like this, because otherwise your bends in your tape are going to let the paint, and in this case the antiquing gel, go down under, and you have a problem. So the little pieces are better. Doesn't matter what the tape looks like, you're trying to get a good edge on this. What I'm going to be using here is the Heirloom Traditions antiquing gels, but a mix that I keep on hand for myself. I mix 2 parts of the gold metallic antiquing gel by HTP and 1 part of the champagne metallic antiquing gel. I'll get it out here in a minute. I really like the color of it because it very much matches an antique gold or a softer gold, especially when you are highlighting things. There are times that I have used the straight gold and it's appropriate, but on this old piece, I want it to be a soft gold. I don't want it to be an in-your-face gold. So I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch flat art brush, not a craft brush, because I want these bristles to be really soft so I can control them. And I won't be tapping back, I'll just be tapping on the side of the jar so that I have control of this, because I want a solid coat of color. I'm going to go here on the front to show you. I still want to smooth, so my brush is going to be going really softly on here.
Okay.
The brush has to go softly or you will lift it right back up due to the composition of the antiquing gel, and your antiquing gels especially need to be really stirred off camera. And this is going to need a fair amount of dry time before I can put a second coat on here, but I can clearly see I'm going to need it. I'm going to try to keep my head out of the line of the camera, but more importantly, I need to see that I have covered all of this. There's a little bit of divot there, so I want to make sure there is antiquing gel in there. And my last move is to smooth. So I have more on my brush by far than what you normally see me having. And I know you can't see over here, but I need to get this filled in. And checking underneath and on top, since I want all of this particular band covered. The reason I can keep going back over this with my brush is the antiquing gels have what is called open work time, a longer period of that, so that I can smooth this out. Down here at the bottom, I'm still not certain if I am just painting this middle band gold, or there's another curved piece here that goes into the flat square piece. I'm going to paint both coats on this portion. I'm going to take all of the tape off and I'm going to look at the balance. And that's going to tell me whether or not I actually want to add gold to the next piece of this or not. But to start with, I'm going to start with less and then decide where to go from there with it. And it's going to be the same process. A little bit easier on this because it's wider. But you do want to make sure you've got the entire thing covered. Those last brush marks are very light touch to the surface because you don't want to pull the antiquing gel off. And this is what's going to be done on the other column as well, so that it also can dry. It's really important to get it eye level with whatever you're working on. Yes, it's awkward down here in the floor, but you don't want to get it finished, step back from it, and you've got everything put back together and you go, oh, great, there's a whole place there that I didn't cover. And this is going to need to dry at least 8 hours before I put another coat on it, because it will lift otherwise. The antiquing gel is really quick to reactivate with either antiquing gel or water added to it. Off camera, I continued like I told you I would, putting the second coat of gold on the two pieces that I originally had taped off. This was what I wanted, but down here, just doing this section, the bottom piece just vanished. It was like it wasn't even there. So I did this in increments, and I would advise you when you're dealing with something you're not quite sure where's going to be enough and where's going to be too much with accenting, start and go in progressive pieces, which is what I did on this. So the next thing I did was I taped off the square block, and I just did this piece, thinking that may be enough. And if this column had been freestanding somewhere, it would have been enough, because this block that's underneath the bottom here would have contrasted with the floor and it would have shown up. But when I got this portion done and took the tape off and looked at it, this block of wood had just vanished into this bottom board, but it's looked off. It was almost like this column was just kind of hanging, dangling here above the wood. So I made the choice to go ahead and make the entire base here gold, which is also what was done on a lot of these dressers. Sometimes it was a band, but the columns were all done slightly differently. So sometimes a band works and sometimes it doesn't. The next thing I'm going to do here on camera with you is I'm going to start highlighting these pieces here, because I want them to show up. They're not showing up as well as I want right now, because all of the dark isn't letting any highlights, enough highlights in here to bring out the details. So we're going to move the cameras, and that's the next step I'm going to do with you. And I've got a lot of tape on here to protect areas, and because I'm still not quite sure what I'm doing with a couple of places in this upper portion here. I'm not going to get very much antiquing gel on this. It's just on the very, very tips, and this is way too much for what I need. So I'm going to take it, and when you're going to hear me off out of sight of the camera doing this and hearing that tapping sound, that's what I'm doing with the brush. So that now there are no globs anywhere on that brush, but there is still antiquing gel in it. And my brush is not completely flat, but it's probably at a 30-degree angle coming across here, and I'm going to be using that side portion, never the front, going up and down on this stuff. That just does not work to highlight the details. And it's a very light touch. Now I need a little bit more. It's getting just a little bit too dry on my brush. And I'm going to do exactly what I did before. barely get any, tamp it on the plate, and start working again. And I'm trying to stay off this outer frame. The mantra is always less is more, because you can always go back and add, but it's difficult to get it off and not mess up areas that are good once it's done. If you really don't like the way it's looking, you can use a very damp paper towel and wipe it down and remove what you did not like. In most of the design, it's almost coming at a 45-degree angle as far as the direction you're pulling the brush to get the pieces to come out. Now, I have got some spots here where the antiquing gel got out on that outer frame. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take water and a paper towel and I'm going to get it off. And in this case, I'm really going to get the paper towel pretty wet, because as thin as I'm putting this on there, I wet a spot in the middle here, not the whole thing. And now I'm going to carefully go along this edge here. And remove what I did not want on here. And do the same thing up here on the top. There's a swipe here on this side that I did not want. So that is clear, and now I can start working on what's lower here. I'm going to let Jim move the camera down in angles so that you can see this front section here. I've gotten more antiquing gel across my brush, and hopefully you can see the details start to pop out. I don't want solid color. I just want these details to highlight. And I know by how my brush was pulling that I don't have enough antiquing gel of the Heirloom Traditions antiquing gel to get this across this piece without re-brushing. I'm going to go ahead and do this side around here while Jim moves the camera to over here so that you can see the side to see what details had to be done. That is on the inside on this side. And see what we can get here. This is the same design that is in the front. Then this part I need to wipe this off because I cannot see clearly enough. I need to move the camera to another spot so it's not in my way. And you saw that I was able to get that off. It's hard sometimes to tell exactly how much you need on your brush until you work with it a little bit. And the other thing that happens is your brush changes as you're working because the antiquing gel can start to dry into the brush as you're working. Now, I still need that wet cloth because I need to get off of the background of this where I do not want antiquing gel. I can see some here too. And the paper towel has gotten dry enough that I need to re-wet it to actually get that off. This is also why I wanted to do these bands and let them dry before I came back to do this, because I knew it was going to be harder for me not to smear anything here. So thinking about that and working in stages is important if you don't want to have a mess. I need to work on the foot of this, and I'm not sure how much of that you're actually going to be able to see, but we'll try to deal with the camera and see if we can get some shots. If not, we'll just have to show you the final shot of what it looked like. Detachable cameras become a really helpful thing. Now, these details, without highlighting them, would not show up very much at all on this foot. And I'm also going to come up just to add a little bit of highlight to some of the flat areas on this. Brush and I are having a discussion on how much paint it's going to hold, because we've got a line here, and there's not very much on my brush at all right now, but this is going to be enough to allow this to be seen when it's in the space in the living room, actually in the area where the bar is. The camera's going to need to move again so we can get a front-on shot. My brush is really dry from doing this side over here, so I'm going to take the time to do some highlights on the top of the paw and the very front here, and grab a little bit off the plate so that it's not very much. It's almost like thinking about dusting this with the gold onto, and I do want some down into the grooves here, because that will bring out the detail of the toes without it being a straight line in there. It's not a steady amount of color. We're going to do the same thing here to bring out the toenails. These are lion paws. Keeping the brush pretty dry for this part gives me control and allows me to do some blending. And now this part is going to be more like the very top was. And I may have to wipe here because I failed to put tape across here. Yep, I'm definitely going to need to. But as you saw before, that's not difficult to do. When you've offloaded in new areas and you've gotten a lot of the antiquing gel off the brush, that's when you can go back and add, like you just saw me do, to increase the color without getting solid color. And I turn my brush over to access antiquing gel that is pushed to the other side. And then up here on the wood, where I don't want antiquing gel, with definite pressure, wipe it off. This is also why you want to wait a minimum of 48 hours before adding antiquing gel over stain or over paint, because you want to be able to wipe it off or mist it and completely remove it, depending on what is needed with how you're working. And I've worked some back up into here again to grab light. And now that foot is very viewable, where before the details were not very clear on it. I'm going to do the rest of this off camera, since you've seen how to do it, on the other side of this. And we'll start looking at putting this piece back together completely. There were a lot of things that I thought long and hard about with this particular piece. One of the things I wondered about was whether or not the brass on pulls and knobs and plates in homes, whether they were just allowed to go dark and form the patina. And these knobs all had really heavy patina on them, which is actually dirt and oil that is built up on the metals over time. And when I went back to do the research, what I discovered was it was very normal in the early 1800s and even up through the end of the 1800s and before, that these knobs would have been taken off, and someone in the family, a servant or just a member of the family, would have polished the brass and then reinstalled the knobs. So I made the choice that I wanted to clean them. I first did an extra knob that I had bought that didn't quite match these before I found the one that did. And the metal was in the same condition, and when I polished it with copper polish, I found that copper polish is less harsh on brass and works just as well to clean it. So I used Wright's copper polish, which we'll put a picture of in here. I forgot to bring it out with me. And a toothbrush, a soft toothbrush. And when I pulled it out of that additional knob, I saw that it was very clear the brass had repeatedly been polished. And you can tell it because if you think about brass, brand new brass is very bright, very shiny. This is not. This is polished. This has what would be called a butler's polish that you see on old silver, and it's highly prized on silver. But this is just got a very soft burnish on it from being polished over the years. It's a little clearer. I'm trying to be really careful because this finish is not sealed, but you can see the knobs better against the wood. This shows it even clearer, the polish from being buffed for many years. So I like the fact that it looks like this and that she's going to look like she did when she was first delivered. It's a choice you can make. I really haven't damaged the value of this piece by doing this. If you had a really pristine museum quality piece, you wouldn't polish it. You would talk to a conservator and find out what is the best way to deal with it, and you'd probably be donating it to the museum and not keeping it in your house for use. So that's why I've chosen to do this with these knobs. I'm going to move them off, and we're going to come back and I'm going to talk about the finish on this and the last step that needs to happen on it. This piece has been a labor of love. A lot of people would have said, just paint it. But when I saw the age and I saw the quality of the construction, and especially the quality of the wood and the veneer, it was absolutely, for me, worth taking her back to what she would have looked like originally. She is now ready in structurally and in finish to handle 200 more years of use. We also were luckily able to, by fluke, find at an antique store a key that actually works the locks. So now all of her locks are working, everything is finished on her. And one of the reasons that I chose to polish out the handles, the knobs on this, is because as I did my research, that's what would have been expected with a piece like this when it was first within a home. They wouldn't have allowed it to go to the patina that many of us prize now. They would have kept it polished and cleaned. The knobs would have actually been removed, polished, and put back in place on a regular schedule to keep them the shiny brass that they are. So, all in all, I'm very happy with her. The finish is just glass smooth, flawless on her now. And I think that she has just the right amount of highlight without being overboard on her to go in a lot of different homes with a lot of different styles. Thanks for being here. As always, please give us a like, comment, share. All of that helps us and costs you nothing. And be sure to stay tuned for more upcoming videos.